Alright, well, welcome to part 2 of the Zenith 6S362 repair. This one I'm just going to be going over the cabinet work that I did to the set. And I'll be using visual aids because I tried filming in between, but it just kind of got a little frustrating trying to set up and record and just trying to get it done. And so I decided that I just took pictures in between the major stages to document what I did and to take note of where I screwed up. Because I had some issues with this. For disclosure, I've only actually refinished 2 sets completely. I did one that I wouldn't even call refinishing. It was really just a quick lacquer hack job, and that was more of a, hey, my mom wanted something to look good to put in her office, so I grabbed a cheap set, put a quick coat on it, cleaned it up, and ta-da, it's done. For this one, I wanted to do a finish that would look okay because the set is going to be taken out to events. It's intended to have to be interacted with the public, with members. It's something that's probably going to get beaten up a little bit. So I didn't really need to make it a work of art. I am not to that level of quality. I've still got a lot to learn about doing this the right way. And unfortunately, because I don't have access to a good air compressor setup, I can't really do the optimum, which is to use an HVLP spray gun system for nitrocellulose lacquer. I am stuck using rattle can products. So I do the best with what's commonly available in most stores. And I do have a dedicated woodworking store relatively near me, but their selection on lacquer is, well, they have like 3 different products. They have clear lacquer, satin, and a single option of extra dark walnut, so which was kind of pathetic. But I can at least get some veneers from them and other specialty things, so they're useful in some fashions. Now, as far as the cabinet went, when I got it, this set had been previously stripped, and a quick coat of polyurethane had been applied. I don't like polyurethane for radios. Most people avoid it because it makes a nice hard coating, but it also makes the set look like it was dipped in plastic, which is very unrealistic. Yes, they were typically done in a decent gloss and rubbed and buffed and made to look nice, but they didn't typically have a piano finish, not a super deep, see yourself in the reflection type of deal. Most of them were a slight semi-gloss finish, and in fact, one of the major cabinet guys, Fred Taylor, typically does his, and I think a 60% gloss to get a decent match to factory. It looks good, but it doesn't look super plasticky. So the first thing I did was to remove all of the finish on the cabinet with this stuff. And this stuff is nasty. It is a proper gel stripper. There's nothing environmentally friendly about it, but that's how you know it's good. And I've had that can for probably 3 or 4 years and haven't used all of it yet. You slather it on, you let it sit, and it'll eat through just about everything. It had a little bit of trouble with the poly because the poly doesn't really soften. It sort of crystallizes, and then you have to scrape it away. And it took several applications to really get down to the wood surface and get it all out of the pores. I actually followed that up with, they make a can of after strip, some sort of specialty cleaner to get the stuff out of the pores so that when you do the refinishing, there's none of this left behind in the wood. It actually worked pretty well. I liked that. It's also available at most hardware stores. Some folks use Citrus Strip. I used that at the beginning because they offer it in a spray can. That tends to make a mess. I wound up hitting some of my folks' garage with that by accident and got it over tools and things. So I've stuck to the stuff that's applied via brush. So I can either use a scrubbing pad, like a Brillo pad or something. I avoid using steel wool because it leaves behind small burrs. And if those wind up in the finish, then it looks like crap. So the Scotch-Brite pads, the green ones, I like using those. I would not use them on the softwoods. I would go with the finer texture for safety because the softwoods can actually get sanded down somewhat by the Brillo pads or the Scotch-Brite stuff. So I got all that off there. I did a final wash with my 50-50 mix of acetone and lacquer thinner, which is normally what I use for removing finishes, original lacquer finishes, because it doesn't really leave behind any residue. It's very easy to clean up. Like most of this stuff, you definitely want to use it in a well-ventilated area or outdoors because it reeks and it will make an area stink pretty good for quite a while, and you don't really need to be inhaling all those fumes. But it works the best for me, and it's the easiest to clean up. After I had everything stripped off, the first thing I actually wound up doing was reapplying the black shaded areas to the base molding, the top of the grill bars, and there's two thin stripes. And I had to check several different pictures of original finish sets online to make sure that I was putting them where they should be. And as far as I can tell, I got as close to factory as I can manage. Now, I just used ordinary flat hobby black enamel. I didn't use a gloss because I happen to have a can of flat black, and that seems to have worked pretty well. From the radios that I do have, it almost looks like the flat black was applied last, just from the way the finish has started to craze. It doesn't seem to have been trapped underneath the lacquer like I did, where I put it on first to cover up. But the areas that had it, there still seem to be traces of it, even though the rest of the finish had been stripped, so I wasn't quite sure if it was on top or on underneath. Either way, I went directly back over with a brush, did those, and allowed them to dry. Once those were done, I grain filled the main walnut face of the radio from the top of the cabinet down to the grill bars, packed that in nicely, and I used Timbermate. Everyone online was always recommending Timbermate. I had previously used a water-based material called Crystal-Lac. I think that was what they called it, or something like that. And it was a clear paste, and I could never quite seem to get all of if it sanded off after I was done. I could never quite tell where I'd managed to fill and where I hadn't managed to fill. This stuff comes tinted, or you can get untinted and tint it yourself, and it accepts stains. This is walnut colored because I predominantly work with sets that have walnut on them. First set I've used it on, I applied it using an old credit card as a squeegee, and it worked fantastic. The stuff thins with water, so it's very easy to reconstitute, and I found that using a spray bottle filled with water and spraying areas as I was going along kept the stuff workable, and it prevented me from wasting anything that was stuck to the squeegee I was using. And I got a lot of mileage out of that. And I did wind up with a bit of excess on it, so the surface tends to look like it's covered with mud, effectively, once it dries. That's fine, you want the pores packed. And I went back over that with a very fine grit flexible sanding sponge, and then for the areas that were a little tougher, I went over with a proper sanding block, except for the waterfall area over the top. With those spots, you really got to be careful. If you don't sand with the contour, it's very easy to cut right through that and sand it flat. Because the veneer is very, very thin, and that's the easiest place to get a little aggressive with it. So once the grain filler was off, the second step was to apply a wash coat of shellac to the entire cabinet to prevent the color coats from soaking into the wood and being a little more difficult to get out, and to provide a barrier so that if I didn't like the color, I could remove it pretty easily with mineral spirits. I've even heard some folks using antifreeze as a wash coat or similar. But I have a can of the spray stuff here. The only things I can get locally is the Zenith brand, which I think Rust-Oleum or some other major company, that's one of their subsidiary companies. I actually use the brush-on stuff out of a can, which appears to be pre-thinned, and has a longer shelf life than traditional shellac, which usually comes as flakes, and then you dissolve them in alcohol and mix it yourself. That appears to be what most people are recommending to do. I cannot get shellac flakes in any hardware store around here. They don't sell them. I'd have to order them online probably. And again, I wanted to be able to use things that are commonly available, and the Zenith is basically it. If you want shellac, that's what you're buying at Lowe's or Home Depot or McClendon's or whatever. So I had a can of that already. I've used the spray before, and I like it. Dries quickly. Don't have any coverage issues. I did not read the instructions on the can that stated while it's good for a first coat, they don't recommend using it for follow-up coats. And I learned that the hard way. So after I had my initial shellac coat on there, I went and used Minwax Dark Walnut as the primary color on the top and on the sides, which are just a cheap plywood. In hindsight, I probably should have grain filled those to make them smoother, but the grain seemed fairly tight, so I opted not to at the time because it would have increased the amount of sanding I would have to do. Next time I definitely will. Uh, but I got that on there, and I used this on the sides and the top, although it seems the sides wound up being a little bit darker than the front did. I tried to get them to match, but it didn't work out quite as well as I was hoping to. But again, I don't really have much to work with in terms of original. Most of the original pictures of cabinets, the finish itself has darkened significantly, so it's hard to tell how blonde the veneer really was right out of the factory. So there's a little bit of artistic license in this. So I used, ultimately I used 3 coats of dark walnut on the face, and I think I put 2 on the sides, and the sides still came out darker. Go figure. So I did that, got the color coat on, and I waited several days for this to dry. We had high humidity, and humidity will prevent this from drying properly, and you really want each coat to dry individually. You don't want to put one down and then immediately go back over it. You want to wait a full 24 hours or more for the first stain coat to dry, and then if you go back over it with a paper towel or something, you have areas that are still sticky, wipe them down and wait for it to dry more, because if you go putting a finishing coat over the top of that, you'll probably get fish eyes from the remaining oils that have not completely cured, and it'll wreck the final product. So I gave it plenty of time to dry, and then I attempted to put another wash coat of shellac with a brush over the whole cabinet to seal that in, and the shellac was drying so fast that I was getting areas only partially filled. I would go back, and then I would wind up with some areas having more shellac buildup than others, and everything was uneven, and then I tried to sand it back, and then it just didn't look very good, and eventually I just gave up on trying to clean that up, and I moved on to the toning section. So this has a lot of softwoods on it. These sides, the base molding, and the 3 grill bars take up a decent amount of the cabinet. So I masked off the sides, I masked off the front, and the shellac seems to work okay with the Scotch tape that I have. The lacquer absolutely does not. If you can get specialty tape that actually works with lacquer products, do it. You'll be very happy, because Scotch does not appear to make a tape that at least I can buy that will actually work. Even their delicate stuff, I bought their delicate finish, doesn't matter, it all says not for use with lacquer. It'll peel it, or it'll peel lacquer sanding sealer right off the surface and dissolve it. So I had to deal with that, sadly. But I got the sides toned, and I originally used, there's dark walnut and then there's extra dark walnut with the classic toners. These are an opaque toner rather than a solid color, an obliterating toner. So you can still see the wood grain underneath it, so it's just, it's like putting an aerosol stain on effectively, but it's a fast-drying lacquer. And there's a variety of colors you can get through Mohawk, but this is what I could get immediately. And I applied 2 coats of the extra dark because I wanted to hide a lot of imperfections in the wood. There were a lot of nicks and dings and scratches, which if I were doing a proper job, I would have filled them, smoothed them, and then done it all. And yeah, for a set that's going to get moved in and out of a car a lot, it's going to get banged up even more. There's not much point in putting lipstick on a pig, really. I made it look as good as I really could in the time frame. But I got those on there, let them dry, peeled off the paper and my tape, and realized that everything looked pretty dark comparatively. The toner seemed to stand out much more than the sides. It wasn't blended as well as I'd hoped, which is why I applied additional coats of dark walnut stain to try and make things match a little better, and to try and darken up the main woods. It didn't work as well as I was hoping to, but everyone that saw the radio recently here was, they all told me that it looked fantastic until I tried pointing out the flaws to them, which I probably shouldn't have bothered with. They liked it, so what the hell. Okay, so after we got the color on there, I darkened it up as appreciably as I could, and I let the final stain coats dry. I applied 1 full coat of lacquer sanding sealer. The can recommends not applying any more than that. Maybe I should have. I applied 1 good sanding sealer coat, let it dry, sanded it a little bit to try and smooth the surface out. At which point I was ready to apply the gold pinstriping. So this Zenith and a few other models, like the 6S254 that it was built on, had gold pinstriping, Very, very cool touch. I don't know of a whole lot of radios outside of the Zenith lineup that actually did that. Some of the bigger ones have more than 3 lines in order to match up with the cabinet style. But they're about 1/8 of an inch wide, and the speculation is they were originally done with a metal mask, a pre-made mask that would simply fit over the cabinet at the factory. They could quickly spray on a gold lacquer paint and then move on down the line and not have any overspray or bleed through or anything, and it'd be very, very quick. I didn't have gold lacquer-based spray paint. I probably could have gotten some sort of gold enamel spray paint, which might have been a better option than what I did finally. My method was to use the tape that I had with me, and I measured out where the center of the cabinet was. I measured out to the edges, the centers of the grill bars, and then I ran those pieces of tape all the way from the bottom of the face of the cabinet all the way to the top edge at the back. And I got the distances darn near exact. So the lines are actually straight from top to bottom, and they don't veer left or right. And my ultimate choice with paint was something I'd already had a little bit of experience with, which is Tester's Model Paint. And I got a small bottle of the gold stuff, and I hand applied it to the pinstripe areas. Again, in hindsight, I would recommend a spray gold lacquer paint if you can find it. Otherwise, a gold enamel will probably work. I've heard that enamels don't really like lacquer. I didn't have any issues with it softening it and causing it to screw up. I did have issues with the tape not doing its job and causing some bleed through. So that was a little disappointing. But once I had the tape off, the tape, of course, ate through the lacquer sanding sealer and peeled some of it off in areas. Of course, the most visible of areas on the curve on the top, so that was great. I then tried to sand the finish down a little bit with a cheap sanding block instead of my good sanding sponge, and that marred the surface a little more, so I chucked that. And then I decided to hell with it. The gold stripes are on, the color is all there, and I just want to get the final finish coat on it so that I can at least have it ready to stand up to abuse. So I bought 5 cans, all 5 cans that were available at my local McClendon's, because that's all that I could find that had actual deft lacquer left. No one else seems to carry the stuff. And I use regular gloss. Now, on some radios, I have used their semi-gloss because I like the way it looks, but semi-gloss is apparently softer than regular gloss lacquer is because it has thinners or retarders in it. I forget which. But the gloss stuff is about the same price, and it's very easy to go from gloss to semi-gloss. You can't really go from semi back to gloss without starting all over again. So I went with this. I put 2 good coats of the clear over the whole thing, and I've heard some people say, oh, you can't do a console or something really big with a spray can. I beg to differ. You absolutely can. The nice thing about these deft cans, if you look at the Mohawk ones, they have the typical circular pattern spray head. These are really made for touching up things rather than trying to do large areas. And in hindsight, I should not have gone over short distances with the can. Rather, I should have gone along the longer edges to prevent, because it builds up very easily. If you overlap areas, that area will get very, very dark very, very fast with some of these darker toners. The light stuff, it was very hard to tell. This stuff, I made some tiger striping by mistake by overlapping areas that I shouldn't have. If I'd done broad strokes, I probably would have avoided that. So I'd sign as 20/20 in that case. However, these lacquer cans, even the lacquer sanding sealer, use these wonderful adjustable fan tip valves. These are awesome because they provide, technically it says it's a circular pattern, but it's more of a very flattened oval. And this little red guy here, the nozzle, is actually adjustable, so you can change the direction, put it at angles or what have you, so that you can lay down a different setup. These work great. I love these valves. These are fantastic. This is a good lacquer product. I've had no issues with it. It seems to be compatible with everything else I put on there. The shellac, the classic toner, the Minwax oil stain. It doesn't seem to care. If the finish is clean that you're putting it on, it seemed to work just fine. And I was working with at least 50% humidity. It was pretty bad, and it still went on just fine and dried properly. I did give it a full week to cure, though, before I did anything else to it. And what I did ultimately wind up doing was using, and I don't have it here, a little bit of rotten stone, which is a very, very fine powderized polishing compound. You usually mix it with a little bit of light oil on the surface, and then you use it to basically buff out the surface, and it will cut down the gloss. And it cut down the gloss on this quite appreciably, actually. And I really liked the way it turned out. In fact, I'm going to see about doing the rest of the cabinet with it. The molding work will probably be a little bit tricky to do that on, but it was very easy to do. Wiped right off with a paper towel after I was done, and I just used some random Hops gun oil that I had laying around. They didn't have what they wanted, like butcher block oil or mineral oil. I don't have any of that. I just used some generic. I probably could have used motor oil and it would have been fine. But that worked out really, really well. I was very happy with that. So I will definitely be doing that on the next cabinet I try. So glue the gloss on it and then knock it down with the rotten stone. So that worked out wonderfully. And then as far as the final product went, well, it had a good reception. People liked it. So that was great. And at this point, we should probably go take a look at the unit itself. All right. Now, this is not supposed to be part of my permanent collection, but for the time being, I am stuck housing it. So, here is the more or less final product. Now, sitting next to the 9S365, again, the finish on that one is darkened over many, many years, so I'm not entirely sure how light, and if it was closer to how I have this here. I kind of like the way this turned out. I'm not sure if I got the color down here too dark. I think next time I do a set, what I would like to do is use one of the airless sprayers that have like the turbine in them, and do the whole thing with the same stain to see if that gets a much better uniform color over the whole thing, instead of trying to hit all these massive areas with rattle can toner. If I can avoid doing that and still get a decent even coverage, that would be pretty cool. But on the whole, I mean, for a show set, I think it turned out pretty good. I'm really, really happy with all the reproduction buttons and the knob that I got for renovated radios. These are fantastic. I will say, though, these fingers in here, I don't know how easy they were to remove originally. The retention mechanism appears to just be gravity. So moving it around a lot, you'll more than likely bump one of these and it'll fall right off. And also the push buttons themselves, there really isn't much behind there that retains them. It's just this rectangular opening. It is punched. There's a little bit of a surround on the back, and there's a piece of stiff felt that seems to provide a little bit of cushion, but they sort of wobble around in their positions. I don't know, it seems kind of cheesy. I mean, the whole setup's kind of cheesy. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty happy. Let me grab and pull this away from the wall here, so we can get a better look at it overall. Now I've got what? The sunlight in here kind of messes with things. The biggest issue I had was that in direct sunlight, or at least in my living room, the difference in color between the side panels and the front was pretty apparent. But I haven't hit the sides with rotten stone, so I don't know if that would change it at all. I think I might have done one extra coat of the dark walnut stain on the sides more than I did the top. So those might actually be darker than they're supposed to be. I was working off of old photos of faded cabinets and things. This black stripe right here that goes all the way down was the only thing that I could actually find on the sides that was confirmed. Yeah, but overall I was pretty psyched about it. Now, let's get it back in position. And I did put new feet on this. They originally had felt in them. After moving it 2 or 3 times at the swap meet, I brought it home and discovered the felt was long gone. I ain't got none of that left. My floor's already pretty dinged up as it is, so I don't really feel too bad. But let's see what we get. Should need to go more than about 3.
Northwest traffic every 10 minutes on the 4s. From the High Performance Homes Traffic Center, here's Sam.
Thanks very much. We're continuing to see delays on I-5 southbound at exit 186 to State Route 96 in South Everett that early.
Seattle's BIN 850.
Founder and CEO of Real Estate.
Everything.
You guys! I love this song! I love these nachos.
Powering possibilities.
Ends September 21st, 2023. Restrictions apply. Mobile offer requires 100 megabits per second internet package and...
Let's try out the different tone controls. Right now we're on normal.
When you wake up well rested on a great
Let's try voice.
Everything becomes clear. I do have a favorite child. Things you missed when you were tired.
So that's basically just all treble. And let's switch over to high fidelity.
Here for real at Mattress Firm. Get a king bed for a queen price. Save up to $700 on Sealy and get a free adjustable base plus fast free delivery. The right mattress matters. We'll find yours.
How about base?
See starmattressfirm.com for details.
Well, there's bass in there, all right. And how about foreign? I'm not entirely sure what they were doing with the foreign setting. It seems to just be bass, but slightly less so. That's kind of odd. I would have figured voice would have just been the default for listening into a news broadcast. Normal seems to just be the best option, realistically. Now, let's try out the automatic tuning. Go over to here. Ah! I see that right there. That's what I'm talking about. These buttons, they have a lot of flop. That one almost got sucked into the inside of the cabinet.
If you're like, wow, you're right. I've never heard one of those commercials.
Seattle sports. More Seahawks. More everything you need in Seattle sports.
Coming into the day, by the way, Hunter was 100.
That's the one that's got problems.
We'll kick China out on day 1, then they'll say, well, we're disbanded. I'll say, great, done with it. And my...
Tied with Buffalo at 7 points apiece. 6.5 minutes to go in Madison. Auburn leads UMass on ESPN 24-7. 4.5 minutes to go in the second quarter. Washington's got a fight on their hands.
What do you think?
It's on ABC.
Sounds pretty good.
10 minutes to go in the second. 10th ranked Huskies trailing Boise State 9-7. And Indiana, field goal for the Hoosiers. Third ranked Ohio State leads Indiana 7-3. Devin Brown now in the game for Ohio State. Kyle McCord taking a seat, still standing upright there on the sidelines, but it's Devin Brown's turn with 5.5 minutes to go here in this second quarter. Matt Sims, you okay with a little quarterback rotation here in this game and maybe the next couple to figure out what they have at quarterback?
I can't lie. I am extremely biased because I coached Kyle McCord in my past, and
as far as an antenna goes on this, all I really have to work with at the moment is one of those cheap little loop things that you used to get with certain satellite TV boxes. No, these usually came with FM receivers, and I don't have a long wire antenna set up for this, but this little 2-foot dealie seems to work a-okay with what I've got right now. But overall, I'm pretty happy. This seems to be a very solid performer. Sounds pretty good. And as far as volume goes, this room gets filled with this thing about volume setting 4 or 5. You don't really need to go above that. You'll start to shake things. So that's pretty cool. Certainly can fill a room with this little guy. But it looks great with when it's lit up. I absolutely love the aesthetics of the set. And it did really well at the show. People really liked it. I had the Mariners playing all day long. It turned out really, really good. So I think that's going to about do it for this set. I'm in the middle of working on some other projects. I've got some stuff that I still need to finish. Now that this is done, it'll give me some time to work on other things. And thanks for sticking around for it and listening to me blather on about my refinishing adventure. Until next time, thanks for watching.